We want more LGBTQ plus characters, more main characters, but how do we write them intentionally? After all, queer characters, queer people, we have this extra layer. We're like onions. In case you're new here with this new series, my name is Bridget. I am a queer writer and filmmaker from Canada, and I am here to help you write queer stories. So let's go. When forming the main character for your queer story, there's a lot to consider. There is a lot of intentionality that needs to be taken because this is not just any other story. We still live in a day and age where queer stories are not the norm and society still pushes back against us. So we need to be a bit more intentional because when writing a queer story, it is sadly still political. We need to know what we want to say, and that boils down to your main character. We're not looking at plot yet. We're looking at the person, people that are/is at the center of your story and how we can craft them in the most intentional way possible. In this video, we are going to look at 3 different steps to finding the queer main character that suits your story. Yes, I like the number 3. We are going to be doing a lot of 3s in this series, so get used to it. It's a good number for tips and tricks. We will look at, number 1, orientation. We will look at their chemistry with the case itself. If you haven't chosen your case yet, I would recommend going back to my previous video where we look at the different case files, different types of queer stories. So go check that out. I'll leave a link somewhere. And lastly, we will look at their adaptability as the case goes on. Now, in this process, I don't have an armrest. Now, in this process, I want you to remember that your main character is not set in stone. This is merely a framework that I am giving to you that I have thought a fair amount about, and it's just a tool. This tool, you can break these rules. It's just something that I am gifting to you and saying, if you like this, take it. If you don't, then it is fine. I won't be offended. Just try not to leave hate comments, please. I would appreciate that. So let's dive into topic number 1. For this topic, we are going to be taking the analogy of choosing your partner in this case. So I am going to be putting in front of you different pictures of examples that I have. And so each one we're going to be looking at, you will be taking on. These are all examples from pop culture and TV shows. 2 TV shows, 1 movie. So for option number 1, we have, for selection process number 1, we have Know Me Marks, Sense 8. And for this, we are going to look at orientation. The first area that we want to consider is where your main character falls in the way of the LGBTQ plus spectrum / alphabet soup. What letter are they? And this is important because it determines a lot of the challenges that they will encounter through your story. It determines a lot of who they are because no matter what your identity is, you're going to experience different challenges in your upbringing, and it will form how they view the world and how they interact with the plot moving forward. Now, I'm a big fan of the GLAAD report of film. I looked into it last week and I'm going to do it again. In the film breakdown of 2024 by GLAAD, their survey showed that there were 59 LGBTQ plus inclusive films. 32 of them included gay men, 23 lesbians, 15 bisexual people, 3 non-binary people, 3 included queer people that don't fall into other labels, and lastly 2 included transgender people. As you can see, there is a lot missing in that alphabet soup. We have picked out some letters. So when you are looking at building your queer main character, it is important to look at what your intention is. is their identity integral to the plot? Is there something about their identity that will be important to the plot? For the example of Nomi Marks, it's important to the plot that she is a trans woman because it brings in issues with her family, it brings in issues with the medical system and things like that. It's a big factor in her relationship with her sister and her parents. There is a lot that goes into her acceptance of this added layer of her identity when she finds out that she's a sensate. And so having that backstory, having that as her identity is crucial to her development in the overall plot. With looking at Nomi, her identity as a trans woman has become more widely seen in pop culture, but as it is shown in the GLAAD report, it is still not very common, as there's only 2 included transgender people in 2024's film survey. On the same note, there are identities that aren't even listed here. There are aromantics, there are asexuals, there are intersex people, there are two-spirited people. These are identities that are not commonly explored, or if at all explored in media. So having the intention behind your character's identity is really important. It is something that can drive your character, or overall it could just influence a lot of their personality and how they act in the world. And this is not exclusive to any kind of queer story. It is not simply for queer-centered, aka educational stories. It's not exclusive to the allegory or anything like that. It is simply something to think about. The idea, if you want your character's identity to be a more well-known identity, or if you want to explore something new. So that is the key to this question. Because the queer identities that are featured in the GLAAD report are more easy to market to straight audiences, this is a choice that will influence how you go about marketing or anything like down the line, whether you're doing a screenplay or you're doing a novel. I just realized I didn't turn the fucking giant light on. Give me 2 seconds. Of course I was gonna forget something. This is gonna look very different, but honestly, don't worry about it. It's fine. So it is important to figure out what your intention is. If you want more for your story to appeal to a wider audience, or to dive deep, and sure, your work might only be seen by fellow queer people, but that is an intention on its own. So having that clear in your mind is really important. I think it's vital to be somewhat realistic. In a way, I don't think it needs to drag you down in your creative process. I think it's important to look at your story in a subjective way. Look at what is marketable to straight audiences, what would be more marketed towards queer people, and analyze what you are prioritizing right now. And that is the key to it. If you want to desperately write a story about an intersex person battling dragons, go do that, because we need stories like that. But if the thing you are most passionate about is getting more queer people on screen, then you might need to take a different route, because it's less likely that that will get greenlit by networks. It could happen, but in our current climate, it is not easy. So it's just taking things kind of as they are, but also, write that story, but also, stay flexible. We're going to look at 2 key questions that you can ask yourself about your character's orientation. Now, I've gone into a few questions, but let's go into some major questions that you can ask about this. Number 1, is your main character's identity something widely known or lesser known in our overall society? This is important to know so that you get clear on what kind of story you're writing. Like, how much will you need to explain? how much of a PSA will this be? Number 2, is there a queer identity that you are burning to depict in your story, and how would you want to tackle it? I did this with my first short film. I really wanted to see an asexual kind of rom-com story, and I've never seen that before, so I made that about my own journey with my sexuality. So I highly encourage that. I think it's really cathartic, but at the same time, it is important to know what your intention is professionally and be realistic with that. I think that it is really vital so that you're not let down and you know what your boundaries and your non-negotiables are. So let's move on to candidate number 2. This is candidate/element number 2. I'm not sure how well you can see that, but for this we're going to look at Jesper from the TV show Shadow and Bone. Now, let's look deeper into your character's identity and how it will affect them moving forward in your story. Your character's identity does affect how they approach the plot. It is vital that you allow their identity to impact the plot because it is part of who they are, and having it like be nothing is a message in itself. I think that how Jesper was treated in Shadow and Bone is really interesting because his identity was not the center of the show. It wasn't the center of his storyline. He did have flings with men. He, in the books, clearly identifies as bisexual. And the idea of his sexuality, it wasn't really an issue. The chemistry of his identity with the story itself was a very accepting view. There wasn't really tension around who Jesper was attracted to in any way. There is a rhetoric around writing queer characters where people tend to say, write them like you would write any other character. And although I agree with this to a degree, I think that there's a difference between writing queer characters like everyone else and also taking into account the very unique queer experience. I think that when people talk about this, they are talking about giving them the same amount of depth and intention. And I feel like that should be a given. Like, it feels strange that we still have to say that. The thing is that with queer characters, once we get past the surface level, once we get past, yes, giving them a hobby, giving them a backstory, they're not just like the gay best friend anymore. Once we get past that, we need to look further into the subtext and the internal battle that a lot of queer people have with identity and look at how it affects their everyday lives, how it affects how they move through the plot, how it affects their self-talk on a regular basis. And so many characters like Jesper are quite self-destructive. Jesper has gambling problems, he drinks a lot. It's really something that he carries with him. In the case of Shadow and Bone, I don't think this is directly tied to his queerness. I think that it's more tied to the kind of allegory that is present with him being Grisha. I think that he has this resentment of being Grisha, where they are persecuted for that, which to me seems like a very clear allegory for queer people being persecuted. By the end, Jesper is able to accept this part of himself and be outwardly Grisha. He is using his powers in everyday life. And this is very interesting. It's an interesting use of an allegory, as Jesper is never really ashamed of his queerness. He's never really worried about hitting on men in the show. And so it is really, when it comes to fantasy and science fiction, it is fascinating that we can have a very accepting world in the way of queerness and overall, like, gender and sexuality, but when it comes to other elements like magical abilities, it becomes quite tricky. Okay, that was a long rant. When it comes to this element, it is easy for the character's identity to fall to the wayside. And in the case of Jesper, we don't really dive deep into, we don't even, unless you read the books, he could come off as gay. In the books, he does come out as bisexual. They don't use the overt language because it's not really necessary in this world. It is more so a conversation between Jesper and Wylan. But the thing is that in stories like science fiction and fantasy, it does tend to fall to the wayside in favor of greater world building, because there is a balance that needs to be struck between building the world and building out your characters. So even by season 2, they didn't really have enough like airtime to have that scene, or I would see them not seeing it as totally necessary, because I don't know, Jesper and Wylan were already in a relationship, so I was like, yeah, well, okay, it's fine, so that's enough. This is kind of put in contrast, especially in Shadow and Bone, where we have the example of Elena, the core main character. It's a very ensemble show, so it's kind of confusing in that way. But we have the contrast where Elena is Shu, which is a different ethnicity within the world, and we see a lot of racism towards Elena in the show. And this contrasts the fact that we don't really have homophobia in this world, and it's kind of interesting because we don't have raised eyebrows. We don't worry about Jesper and Wylan having issues around them being together, which is, yeah, refreshing. It does also come back to the allegory of Jesper needing to accept his Grisha powers. There is still this layer of accepting his own identity. So having this chemistry between the plot and his identity, him accepting his Grisha powers does become important to the plot. It becomes part of the case because his character arc in season 2 centers around that. He has the romance with Wylan, but then there's conflict around their relationship because Jesper is keeping his Grisha powers a secret. Their tension is really revolved around that. And so there's a lot of intertwining between these points. I think that's a very vital thing to consider, and when writing a queer main character is really interesting to dive into. It is really cool to learn about your character's relationship with their identity and dive into that. How will it impact your story overall? Let's ask the 2 key questions that will help you with this area, with chemistry. Number 1, how does your main character's identity change the way they approach the journey they are going on? We were just talking about this. So let's get going on it. Let's talk about decisions would they make having this identity? How does it change what they're willing to do, what they're not willing to do? So it's pretty interesting. Number 2, is there discrimination that they experience in the story, either overt or subtextual? As we said, there is the allegory for Jesper around this topic. Let's move on to the 3rd and final step. For this, we are going to be looking at Rachel from the British rom-com Imagine Me and You. If you have not seen this movie, highly recommend it. It has so many great actors in it. I was floored that Anthony Head was in it. He's one of my favorite actors, but no big deal. And it's very sweet, very wholesome. Very good movie. Now, for this, we are going to be looking at adaptability. For your queer characters, it is important for them to change. I mean, come on, that's what we read and watch stories for. We want people to develop, we want them to grow, we want them to learn from their mistakes. And so, when we look at Rachel, when we start out with her, she is literally getting married. And she meets her love interest, Luce, at her wedding to a man. And the progression of her character through the story is really a struggle because she loves her husband. She loves, I really struggle to say his name because it's so ridiculous. I can't believe his name is Heck. Blumenack. So her husband Heck is, I feel like I'm trying to clear my throat whenever I say his name. It's ridiculous. She loves her husband. She has fallen head over heels for Luce. And Heck is her best friend. Over the course of the story, her lesson is really to accept herself and speak out for what she truly wants. Through the story, she is like making pretty bad decisions. Like keeping this from Heck is really rough. Like it's hard. This guy is, there's nothing really wrong with him. There's nothing like going on that's really a problem. But there's just this pull that she has to Luce. And so through the story, girl be struggling. Girl is going through it. She doesn't want to hurt him. And this is vital to adaptability. This section seems kind of obvious. It's like, of course, your characters should learn something. When it comes to writing queer characters, there is an important element that we need to consider. And that is the relationship that your character has to their identity. And I know I brought this up last time, not last time, but like in the last point with Jesper, but I want to emphasize it even more because it is vital and it is a key component to writing queer characters in general. The relationship that we have to our identities is a huge part of how we interact with the world, how we perceive ourselves, how we present ourselves. It impacts so much of our lives. And so having your character adapt to a new way of thinking, in Rachel's case, is huge. When it comes to her transformation, there is a lot of acceptance of her new reality. This is an experience that she has never had before, and so her conflict with it is a conflict of identity. And so through the story, her relationship to her identity has to change, which is hard. It is hard to accept a change in our identities. Another example of this is Charlie Spring from Heartstopper, and his character progression from the timid kid we see at the beginning of the Heartstopper books / series to the rather charismatic head boy that we have both in the later comics now and in Solitaire are vastly different versions of the same person. I don't want to say vastly different people because they're the same person. He's the same person. He's just grown. He's grown a lot. His relationship to his identity is quite different as he experienced a lot of trauma with bullying at school, and now he has been able to gain support through his friend group, through his boyfriend Nick, and getting over the toxic relationship that he had with Ben. When it comes to writing queer characters, we need to consider, usually in straight and allo cis het white male protagonists, we don't usually have to deal with this. It's kind of a given that they're secure in their identity. But when it comes to dealing with queer characters, when it comes to dealing with people of color, when it comes to dealing with people with disabilities, we need to think about these things because society still doesn't fully accept it. And so our relationship with our identities is quite different. Your character's self-perception is also really important. This is especially in character-driven stories. It is different for plot-driven stories, but we're going to focus on character-driven stories in this. We do have the advantage of having extra levels that we can explore, And that it takes the form of gender identity. It takes the form of sexuality. We can explore all these different facets of our identity that are different from the norm. And so there are all these different landscapes that we have access to, which are not typically looked into. This is a fun opportunity where we can look into ourselves and ask ourselves, like, is there a part of our past? Is there something we'd want to say to our younger selves? Is there something that we just want to explore? Is there something that emotionally we want to connect with and dive deep into? I think that a really interesting thing to do is to dive into a kind of hard time in our lives that maybe we haven't processed. Putting that in the form of a different character is really a cool way to bring new light to the situation. It really forces us to look at it from an objective point of view. So I would encourage you to look into your own past and dive into things that maybe you haven't unpacked, or things that you would want to share with other people but don't really want to talk about overtly. Here are the questions that we can ask to dive a bit deeper into the adaptability of our main character. Question 1. What kind of resistance does your main character have to taking on this case? So what is stopping your main character from dealing with the plot? What is going to be their constant kind of speed bump on their way? Self-acceptance, for instance. And number 2, how does this case push your main character to change their views on themselves and or the world around them? So what is their lesson overall? Is it around their identity, or is their changing view of their identity simply followed? Is it just a byproduct? That's the word I was looking for. Is it simply a byproduct of learning their lesson? And so let's recap what we covered today. Number 1, determining a main character's orientation will help flesh out your story and may possibly give you more plot points moving forward, since their actions are impacted by their orientation. Number 2, your character's identity should impact their story. It should impact how they act throughout the plot, even if the world itself, if it's a fantasy or science fiction story, it should still impact how they act, even if it's through an allegory. And number 3, your main character's self-perception should change throughout the story, and their relationship to their identity can follow suit. It can fully change by the end of the story. Our identity is a major obstacle in our modern world. Yes, self-acceptance is the key. Those are all 3 of the examples, all 3 of the steps that can help you bring your queer main character to life and shape them with intentionality. I am super excited to hear about what kind of main characters you guys are writing. Leave them down in the comments if you'd like to share. And being the prism for another rainbow, I'm trying to make them a little catchphrase because I really like it. So keep being prisms for a new rainbow. And I'll see you guys next week.